Hi, welcome to another Expert Insights discussion. Today we're joined by Javier Delgado from Mirai. In this interview, we discuss the hugely important topic of the EU's Digital Markets Act, DMA, and its impact on major platforms like Google and Booking.com, but also its subsequent influence for hoteliers. Javier outlines the original intention of the DMA and also the criteria that is used to identify and designate what qualifies as a gatekeeper. He illustrates how the changes Google has made to comply as a gatekeeper has led to a 30% reduction in hotel ad clicks and increased visibility for OTAs within Google. And he also discusses the possible impacts on Booking.com being designated as a gatekeeper. Really hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Javier. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We've got a fascinating topic. Well, I find it fascinating. Sometimes it might be a little bit more detailed than people spend a bit of time looking at, which is why we wanted to get you on here. And we're going to be talking about the Digital Markets Act, DMA. But before we dive into the depth of it, let's first of all, just for those who haven't seen some of the other discussions that we've had or don't know you, if you could just introduce yourself, because your background is also very pertinent and relevant to what we're going to be talking about. So welcome first of all, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. It's great to be once again with you. Thanks for having Mirai on this interview. So my name is Javier Delgado Muerza. I am a partner and CEO for EMEA at Mirai. Mirai is a company that works with about 4,000 hotels worldwide, helping them be more profitable and more independent by leveraging our technology and our knowledge with service attached to that. Regarding my background, I've been in the travel industry for about 25 years, started originally in tour operators, then spent about 8 years at Expedia, one of the leading online travel agencies worldwide, another 7 years at Google, helping travel clients get the most out of their digital investments and through technology. Then worked as Chief Commercial and Digital Officer for a large hotel chain operating about 40,000 rooms worldwide. And for the last 3.5 years, I've been leading Mirai with other capable people helping hotels make more money.
I can't believe it's been three and a half years. It has been a while since we've spoken. Okay, let's dive into this, because it'll pick up on your background with Google. Also, interestingly enough, it won't directly touch on your time. It won't directly touch on Expedia, but it does touch on what would have been one of your big competitors. And so your insights will obviously be very, very relevant. So if you could set the scene for us, first of all, and maybe we could start off with just a brief headline overview. What is the EU's DMI, Digital Markets Act, and what was the theory about it? Why did it come about?
Okay, so I'm trying to simplify a topic that is relatively complex.
Yeah.
So the DMA and the DSA, the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, are EU-wide legislations designed to protect the consumers. That's the DSA. And the DMA is an EU-wide legislation aimed at controlling or ensuring fairness on the bigger platforms.
Okay.
Platforms understood as operators who have a relevant impact in the economy and in the way businesses interact with each other.
Okay.
And there's a very specific name for those. They're called the online intermediation services within the DMA. And actually, a fundamental piece of the DMA is the definition of the so-called gatekeepers, which are online intermediation services that stand between supply and demand.
So the online intermediate services, the OIS, they are colloquially referred to as gatekeepers. Is that right? Are they one and the same people we're talking about here?
Not all of them.
Okay.
So you have different online intermediation services, which are any platforms that stand between supply and demand, but only a few of those that comply with certain criteria
Hmm.
are designated as gatekeepers.
Okay, that criteria pretty tough criteria, pretty defined criteria.
Well, it's certainly very well defined, and actually it stands on three basic pillars.
Hmm.
The first one is that they have a significant impact on the internal EU market.
Okay.
The second is that they provide a core platform service that it's an important gateway for businesses to reach users.
Okay. Yep.
And the third one is that they enjoy what the EU calls an entrenched and durable position, meaning they have a very strong, solid foundation in the business they operate.
Oh, okay. So a really
Right.
strong market share for.
Market share and
Yeah.
very difficult to replace, to put it that way.
Got you. Okay.
And on the
Understood.
first point, which is significant impact on the internal market within Europe,
Hmm.
they refer to a specific amount of money that they need to have in terms of turnover or market valuation. And those bars are quite high because the amount of money that they need to turn over is over 7.5 billion, or a market cap in the last 3 years on average of 75 billion. So we're talking
Wow.
about really, really big
Okay.
platforms.
Which will make sense when we talk a little bit later on, when we talk about some platforms
Yeah,
that people might think, oh, well, if this one is, surely this one is. And now that sets the bar as to why certain companies may not have been drawn into this. Okay.
correct.
Okay.
And let's not forget, Trevor, that this initiative is very, very well intended. And we think that its origin and its conception is very positive because it's
Hmm.
aiming at controlling or maybe deleveraging some of the power that these big platforms have developed through time because of the relevance they have in the market, in this case, the European Union specifically. So
So
it's very well intentioned.
bringing greater fairness, I guess, because we always think about controlling, and no one likes to use the word controlling. It's like a big brother kind of thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, we kind of know regulation at some way has to bring a degree of fairness, which I guess is where this was trying to
that's
go.
it.
Would that be fair?
That's absolutely right. It aims at creating a more leveled
Level.
playing field and
Yep.
more fairness into the market. That's
Okay.
absolutely right. I'm not sure it's accomplishing that objective, but
We'll come to that
originally,
later. At least the original intention was from a good place.
exactly, exactly.
And as with a lot of regulations, they don't always necessarily in the early days fulfill. And when we were talking before we started this, you kind of said this is a bit like one of those series that you binge watch, that it kind of develops over time, and there's maybe a few more series 2, series 3 to come. Very quickly then, can we just put some time frames on this? When did this all come into play?
Sure. So this DMA law has been in the works for many years.
Hmm.
It really came into place in February 2023
Hmm.
for the first batch of gatekeepers, actually, because there
Hmm.
have been two batches.
Okay.
And the initial platforms that were designated gatekeepers were Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, ByteDance, Meta, Facebook, and
Yep.
Microsoft. And then
Okay.
at a
So
later stage, Booking
smallish
was added.
companies, but they book up quite. Yeah. And
Yeah.
later on, you were saying, sorry.
So those were the initial ones, and
Yep.
then Booking, which is actually why we're talking about today,
Yeah.
was added to that gatekeeper list at a later stage
Okay.
in May this year.
Okay. So they're the latest one to be added. Yeah.
That is correct.
That you had that first batch, and then what was? Okay. Just very quickly, and then we'll move on. But why were they not included first time round? Why have they been included this time round? Can you give us some of the nuance in amongst
Yeah,
that?
it is a great question. There's actually a public statement from Booking about this specifically, and they claim that because of COVID, they had been affected in terms of market cap and in terms of turnover, those
Hmm.
thresholds that we spoke about before,
Hmm.
on the previous 3 years, because remember that we are talking about the designation happened in July 2023. So
Okay.
if you go
If you go
back
back
to
3 years, it would have been right across COVID. Nobody was
exactly.
traveling. No one was booking. So I guess they were looking at yeah.
According to Booking, they didn't comply or they were not above those thresholds for the last 3 years, and the European Commission actually accepted that claim. And as
Yeah.
a result, they were not included in the first batch. But Booking.com said we will be compliant, so we will be gatekeepers by the end of 2023.
Okay.
And as a result, they were ratified, they were confirmed as gatekeepers in May 2024 by the European Commission. And
Yep.
actually today, literally today, November 15th, was the date, 6 months after May 15th, by which they have to be compliant with the gatekeeper regulation that applies within the DMA.
And that makes sense as to why yesterday we saw various announcements coming out from Booking to say that they were now compliant and let everybody know they've been good actors in this thing. Some might have a view on that, but we won't comment at the moment.
We will get into that.
I don't want to get sued by Booking. So anyway, so just going back to that fairness point for a moment before we then look specifically at the platforms that most impact our audience, the hoteliers. So just for the moment, back to that fairness and the intention. If I'm sitting there in the EU and I'm looking at the hotel sector, what was I hoping would happen by bringing in the DMA? What were some of the intentions that they maybe envisaged would help level the playing field, if that makes sense?
It's a great question, Trevor. Actually, the DMA, which is a very long document, had a very specific objectives, and it had like 3 do's and 2 don'ts for these gatekeepers. We're not talking about Booking specifically, but these
just general.
Exactly, these big platforms in general. And the do's of the DMA said gatekeepers must allow third parties to interoperate with the gatekeeper's own services.
Okay.
The gatekeeper must allow the businesses that are participating on the platform to access the data generated through their systems for the businesses. So it should allow the businesses that are participating to know what's going on from a data perspective. And also the gatekeepers must allow the businesses to promote their offer and actually build contracts and relationships with the final consumers outside the gatekeepers platform. So it's quite ambitious when you think about it, right? So those three kind of do's or obligations are very, very, very ambitious from a business perspective, because it's literally bringing down the barriers that many of these gatekeepers have built through time, right? Then from a don'ts perspective, from the the things that the gatekeepers should not do, is that they should not treat their services and products more favorably from a ranking perspective than other third-party platforms. And this is Article 6.5, which is pivotal, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
And the second do not, from a DMA perspective, is that the gatekeepers should not prevent consumers from linking to other businesses outside of their platforms. So basically, you are telling these big platforms, guys, open the gates and allow the supply and demand that you are somehow arbitrating, let them interact directly. Again, this is not for Booking.com. This is for all gatekeepers. But we are talking about Booking.com.
And just to make sure it isn't just focused on Booking.com, Google, as you say, or Alphabet, which is behind Google, is one of them. Google are often being accused that through their business processes, emphasis of their services, their solutions are always promoted more than other third-party providers. And I guess that ties into one of those do nots, i.e. you must not promote yours above anybody else's.
But it also applies to Amazon from a retail perspective. So think about the impact in Amazon, or TikTok by the dance for the video content, or Meta Facebook for social relationships and communications. Imagine WhatsApp and things. These platforms owned by these bigger platforms. So the potential impact is huge. Now, we only have insights or very good understanding of what it means for the hotel ecosystem, because that's what we do at Mirai.
Of course, and that's what we want to dive into. So that's a great segue for us to it's talk about the key platforms that have been affected that really impact the hotel sector. Before we get into that, I guess what I took from reading everything that had been written about this is that ultimately they were hoping that there'd be, from a hotelier's perspective, greater pricing freedom, increased competition, greater direct bookings, all of those things that you see hoteliers want, that seem to be some of the assumptions that people were hoping may come out of this. But let's dive into specifically focusing on the hotel sector. So Google is an obvious platform that a lot of you utilize with your hotel clients, hotels use. That would be one that obviously could be affected by this. Booking, we've mentioned a couple of times, that would be affected by that. Are they the main two, or are there, where does Meta and Facebook and that sit within this, or is it really Google and Booking that's had the biggest impact?
It's a great question, Trevor. So for the hotel sector and for the distribution of hotel rooms, it's Google and Booking the most affected.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's maybe then take these one at a time. Let's start with Google, because they were designated a while ago. There's probably more has been going on with them. I know you guys have already been writing articles and what you've been seeing with your clients, so we can touch on that. And then after we've spoken about Google, we'll talk about Booking following that.
Sure.
So over to you then. How has this impacted Google? How have Google been changing? What are you seeing in terms of, maybe if you could, two areas, sort of what are you seeing, how the platform has responded, and how as a user maybe I'm seeing things different. And then if you could talk a little bit to what you've seen the impact actually from your client's perspective, that would be great to kind of give those two angles. So first
Sure.
of all, as a platform, how has that had to change?
So we first need to define Google as a platform, and Google is a very big company that operating different businesses and different platforms within those businesses.
Very
so one of those platforms is search, the search engine, the generic, white.
Everything we think of when most people say Google, it's what you think of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there are other platforms within Google. Think about YouTube, think about Gmail, think about Maps Geo, think about Google Hotel Ads, and Google Hotel Ads is very relevant for this. Mm-hmm. So when Google was declared gatekeeper, it applies through all of the platforms that they operate, not only one. So it's applying to all of them. And actually the gatekeeper designation points out some specific ones.
Okay.
And one of the articles that are more relevant for this discussion is 6.5, which is about self-preferencing. Yeah. And the article says that you cannot preference yourself or give a better treatment to your own sub-platforms. So if we think about search as the parent platform and hotel ads a sub-platform, that you shouldn't give more visibility to that sub-platform which is owned and operated by you versus third parties.
Okay. So now, how does that play? Yeah, go on.
There's a very clear actually example of that everyone who's listening to this is going to understand. That applies to hotel ads, but it also applies to Maps Geo. As a result, the DMA says you cannot self-preference your own sub-platforms. Then you can no longer click in continental Europe, in DMA markets, you can no longer click with your thumb on the Maps entry of a business that is listed within Google search, which is generating a lot of frustration for the users that for the past 10, 15 years,
they just,
are used to clicking, with their thumb when you're using especially on your mobile phone. I want to get to that restaurant or that shop or, that hospital, hotel, whatever it is, you just click and it takes you there. Yeah. Now, because of the interpretation, the European Commission is telling Google, you are a big search operator, which certainly Google is. You have the Maps component, which is, a very relevant sub-platform within your company. You cannot link the two. As a result, users can no longer navigate with Maps. So that's generating a lot of frustration. And we know, because Google told us, that many people are calling them saying, please change this. And they say, well, we can't, because this is a EU regulation. Now,
so just pick up on that. So if I wanted to meet you in a hotel in a city that I didn't know, your city, and I landed and wanted to click on Maps and I say, oh, we're going to go to this hotel. And it
does not work.
I wouldn't really.
No, what you can do in the UK, because you're sitting in the UK.
Yeah, because we're not in the, but I can't do it once I've landed in your city.
Exactly. So you put Hotel X in London and Maps is going to tell you, take
Yeah.
this route.
Yeah.
If you do that in Europe, that's no longer. If you go through Maps, yes, you can. But
Okay. So
the
if I go
logic
in
is,
through, right. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
but if
Yeah.
you come through search and
Yep.
Maps is a component of search, then it's preventing that link from happening. Now,
Okay. Okay.
let's
That's useful to
let's
clarify.
let's transpose this to hotel ads, because the
Yeah.
logic that is being applied by the European Commission is saying, okay, you are Google and you operate search. The consumer is looking for hotels in Lisbon.
Yep.
Now, you, Google, cannot give more prominence or more visibility to your own iOS versus other iOSs like Booking, Expedia, and the likes,
Okay.
because it's treating, the European Commission is interpreting that Google Hotel Ads as a sub-platform is an iOS. But the fact is that many hotels participated on the iOS results in the Google Hotel Ads results with their own websites.
Yep.
So the visibility that Google was giving to those businesses through hotel ads was direct visibility to the hotel's websites.
Yep.
And the European Union is saying, well, that's not compliant, not cool, because you are self-preferencing your own
Oh,
results. But the fact is that those
but that was the
results
hotel.
were not Google's, were
Yeah.
hotels'
That was
websites.
hotel. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Okay.
Google had Google had to change. Well, hotel websites that were participating on Google Hotel Ads, which is a
Yep.
sub-platform or product operated by Google, certainly so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the traffic, the eyeballs, the clicks were going to the hotels' websites instead
Yep.
of intermediaries.
Yep.
Now, because Google needs to be compliant with the DMA and Article 6.5, which is do not self-preference your own products like Google Hotel Ads, they had to give greater visibility to intermediaries like Booking, Expedia, or
So
anyone who's selling
So,
hotels.
so let me understand. So if I ran a hotel in Lisbon, I
Yeah.
was paying for a hotel ad.
Hmm.
When somebody searched, I would have come up higher in that ranking
Yep.
because
Yep.
it was an ad.
Yep.
Someone would have clicked on it and come through to me, not a booking function within Google or anything like that. It was just me advertising, but that's now been taken away.
That is
So
correct. Let me
I would
use
not be appearing high up on that search for paying that money, or
yeah, let me use the reservation functionality
yeah,
instead of booking to avoid confusion with
yeah. Oh,
booking.com,
yeah. No,
right?
good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So because it gets
Yeah,
quite
no, it does get when
complex.
we use that same terminology. Good brand name, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, certainly so. No discussion about that. So the point is, according to our data, and again, we are not the whole market, but we do have a significant footprint, especially in Southern Europe,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Spain,
Yeah.
France, and Portugal. What we see within our aggregated data is that when you compare DMA markets versus non-DMA markets, the number of impressions and the clicks derived from those impressions. So an impression is when an ad appears, and a
Yep.
click is when someone interacts with that link
Actually
and
goes with it. Yep.
goes to the website that is behind that link.
Yep.
We see a clear spread in terms of click growth and impression growth from DMA markets versus non-DMA markets, which means that countries affected by this regulation, hotel ads, clicks are less than in non-DMA markets. Now,
So if we were comparing,
yep,
if I'm in the UK,
yep,
I can search because I'm not in the EU, so I could
correct.
still get the hotel ads being presented to me. If I then was to move, say, to Austria,
Hmm.
and then I was to search for the same hotel. So I'm still searching for a hotel in Lisbon, one I'm doing in the UK, and now I teleport myself into Austria. You would see, looking at those markets, a fundamental difference that those in the EU, Austria as this example, would be significantly lower than in the UK. Would that be, maybe the word significant isn't an appropriate word, but it would
Well,
be lower.
it is correct. So
Mhm.
the search experience and the links exposed to you as a consumer slash traveler in the UK versus the Austria example is
Yeah.
going to be very different. Now,
Okay.
the number of clicks that are going to hotels operated and owned website versus intermediaries is in the neighborhood of 30% delta. So DMA
Less.
versus not correct. Correct.
30% less.
30% less growth
Wow.
in one versus the other. That is correct. So it is significant. And if
Yeah.
you assume that a market is 100% of the demand, you
Yeah. Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
stimulate demand. Demand is what it is.
Yeah.
Have a certain number of people.
Yeah.
If those clicks are not going to the hotels' websites, they are
Where are they going?
going to the intermediaries, right?
Right. Okay. So the
It's
whole thing about trying to have more fairness and trying to create a level playing field in a way, this you could say has undermined their original intention. You say it was done for all the best intentions, but if
absolutely
30% is now going to intermediaries, the hotel is not gaining from this level playing field that was originally attended. Would that be fair?
That's absolutely right, Trevor. There's a caveat. So the
Okay.
30% difference is in the growth of clicks, so not on
Yep.
the absolute number,
Okay.
but still, it
It's
holds
still a
absolutely true
significant number.
what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
meaning what in the past was going to the hotel shops, to the official shops, now it's
Hmm.
going to an intermediary. And obviously, obviously there's a direct consequence of that, which is the hotel that is getting the traffic that before they were getting direct, now it's going through an intermediary who's charging them a commission,
Yeah.
right? So
So how does
actually
that?
you could tell that the intermediaries, some of them being gatekeepers,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the position they have, they are
Yep.
recouping or they're benefiting from the
From that.
traffic changes derived from the interpretation of
Yeah,
this law.
because ironically, those intermediaries still need to utilize Google, but they have a greater
Exactly.
marketing budget to be able. Wow. Okay, that's an interesting byproduct that probably wasn't first anticipated.
Certainly not. And actually, we were last week in Brussels meeting with the European Commission, sharing our interpretation of this data and
Yeah,
saying, the DMA is a great initiative. We're fully supportive of that. But it appears that according to our numbers, the original objectives are not being met because in our interpretation, this is costing hundreds of millions of incremental commissions for the hotels in the European Union.
yeah,
And more importantly, the European consumer has less choice when they are looking for a hotel service.
yeah. Makes sense. Okay. Again, you're great at this because it provides us the next segue into talking about intermediaries. So, first thing for the purpose of clarification for those listening, you kindly enough clarified this for me earlier. So we're going to be talking about booking.com. And
Yep.
the reason that we're talking about them and not Expedia, and they haven't been brought in, is to your earlier point about the bar that a business has to get over to be considered a gatekeeper. So just to refresh us and to clarify that, Booking are included, but Expedia are not, because Expedia do not have that criteria, yes?
That is correct. Out of the 3 points that we mentioned before, and without getting into the full detail, basically Expedia is not above the threshold of market cap and the
Revenues and
revenue position and also market share position in a number of EU countries.
got you.
So
Yeah,
Expedia, in our interpretation, will not be a gatekeeper or considered a gatekeeper anytime soon in Europe.
understood. Yeah, and this applies to Europe, so this is why it's
Correct.
important. Okay, so booking.com. As we mentioned a moment ago, they've had the press release come out to say that, yes, we're there, good actors. There is another article I will refer to in a moment, which is kind of questioning that that PR piece. But just as we did with Google, give us a bit of a heads up as to what you expect to see, or what is happening, or what impacts there may be of this change of booking.com being designated a gatekeeper and in theory compliant.
Right. Well, again, the topic is very vast and the
Yep.
DMA is about 80 pages. So you really need to delve into it with a great amount of detail and get
Yep.
into the weeds to understand all the changes that need to happen. Now, there is a fundamental change that has happened,
Mm-hmm.
which was announced by Booking earlier this year in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
and actually came into place at the beginning of July, I believe, which is the end of parity clauses.
Okay.
parity clauses is a fundamental business leverage that has been used by OTAs in general and Booking.com in particular to ensure they had the best available pricing on their site versus the hotel or other third-party sites.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quite controversial because for actually in many countries, I can think of France, Germany, and Italy, these were declared as illegal or
Yep.
non-compliant with European or specific country
And that
regulations.
was a few years ago. That wasn't a recent thing, was it?
Well, absolutely. I think in France it was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In Germany, which was the first country, 11 years ago, and Italy 8 years ago. And you're talking about France, Italy, and Germany. You're talking
Yep.
about bigger,
Yeah,
one of the
big. Yeah,
bigger,
absolutely.
big EU countries.
Biggest markets. Yeah.
Exactly. So those things that were declared non-compliant or illegal in some European countries have now, that clause has been removed completely from all European markets as a direct consequence of the DMA. So
Mm-hmm.
this is positive. This is good.
Okay.
Now, this is just one piece of it, because when you think about the gatekeeper, in this case, Booking.com, needs to open their books, if you will, to the
Mm-hmm.
advertisers, in this case, the hotels,
Mm-hmm.
so they can have better access to the consumer and the data that those consumers are putting through the Booking.com pipes, to put it in a simple way.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So marketing techniques, databases, behavioral data about
Mm-hmm.
those users.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the fundamental points about gatekeepers is that they should promote the communication and the contracting outside of their own platform. Now, I haven't read the 30-page.
Right. Okay. Go on. Yeah.
I haven't read the 30-page document that Booking.com published yesterday, and I will be
Mm-hmm.
doing so over the weekend. But I'm not sure that there will be a proactive move by Booking.com to ensure that, or promote, the contracting and the business relationship happening outside of their platform. Maybe there is. I haven't
Yep.
read
And as
again.
you say, that is the caveat, and that's important to stress.
It's very important, but basically, because of the DMA, what wants to do is kind of bring down those barriers. It's very important to understand and interpret how are these gatekeepers doing that. Now, and also an interesting point is that when Google introduced the changes derived from their gatekeeper status, which happened in February this year,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I think it was 14 days later, the European Commission opened an investigation saying the changes that you have applied are non-compliant with the DMA, and as a result, we are going to investigate you.
Interesting.
So, but
So
as
this
far
could
as
happen for Booking then, for is what
well,
you're.
we don't know, but
No, but when they review it, they may look and say, "Hey, yep,
it,
you're
it
compliant, or you're non-compliant."
it could be. I mean, this is what happened to Google, and
Yeah.
to our understanding, there's no yet an announcement or a conclusion on that compliance or non-compliant with the DMA that started in February, but
Mm-hmm.
it should come out at a certain point in time. So on the Booking.com, again, early hours, not even
Yeah. Yeah.
24
Yeah.
hours have passed
No,
since the
indeed.
announcement, but I guess the EC will need to understand and interpret if the changes introduced are good enough or not with the compliance. On this note, there's a meeting in Brussels taking place on the 25th of this month, so 10
Okay.
days from now.
Keep an eye
We
out for
will
that.
be
You'll be there.
participating.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You'll be there.
And it's an open workshop actually for the industry to discuss with the EC if the Booking.com changes introduced are compliant or good enough or not. So there's
Interesting.
a lot
Do
going
you?
on this front.
So I just want to pull out a couple of points then in relation to the do's and don'ts, the fundamental pillars, the
Yeah.
5 pillars that sit there. So and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, and this is why I want to ask the question. So if I go to Booking, I know when I'm making a reservation, let's use to your point, on booking.com, I'm using their solution. So if they're meant to be making it fairer, will they provide an option where now I can book direct to the hotel through their platform? Because in theory, they shouldn't be. The whole thing is to take down the walls, isn't it, that they've put up and say, well, I should, you're marketing this hotel. They should be able to book the hotel through your platform, not just only book through you. Is that, have I understood that
That is
right, wrong, or?
Well, that is a great interpretation, and there's a lot of speculation about this, and
Hmm.
certainly this could be one of the possibilities, but we certainly don't know.
Don't know. No.
Now,
Okay.
when you think that, Booking.com, like many other OTAs and intermediaries, they have very strong, hefty marketing budgets to get
Mm.
traffic to their
Yeah.
great brands, because these people
Yeah. Absolutely.
have built great brands through time. But when you think that they're investing a lot of marketing dollars to bring those people into the shop, and then they need to have a link within the shop that is taking you outside of the shop,
Yeah.
which is one of the interpretations of the DMA,
Yeah.
it's kind of counterintuitive why they would be willing to do
To do.
that
But then you could
beyond the
understand that they've been gaining because of what's happened to Google, that now suddenly everything's coming to them. They're becoming like the smaller little platform for
this is
than Google, so to speak.
that's exactly right. So it's all subject to interpretation, and as a result, it's kind of fluffy, because
Yeah.
depending on how you look at it, it could be, go one direction or the other. But
Yeah.
as you rightly say, the minute you start saying that a gatekeeper, because of their dominant position, should not impose a given outlet to book, to make a reservation, and that they should open to third parties and competitors, including the hotel's website, is like going to a general store or a department store and saying on the shelf you need to put actually access to the official shop across the street,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're not making money on the traffic that you brought into.
Yeah. Yeah, so
It's a bit
you're
weird.
spending money to get people to you, and then they could choose to go to the store directly and buy from them, and you're not getting anything. And I guess unless that store is now paying to market on your platform,
but
so it
but
becomes a marketing rather than a booking
a
transaction,
transaction.
possibly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Correct. So it's certainly difficult to
Interesting.
interpret because
Yeah,
of this self-preferencing. It
that
could
makes
go in,
sense.
in different ways. Yeah.
Another quick question for you then around, because you mentioned about opening data, communication. One of the issues that has often you see is written about is that from a hotel side where you want to build loyalty with the guest, but if that booking, if that reservation has come through a third party, you can get limited data. You maybe don't get email addresses, you don't get things like this. So then you have to wait and try and build that with the guest when they arrive. Does this now mean that, in theory, if a reservation was made through booking.com, I could request any information they have about that guest that is booking me? And I'm conscious you haven't read through all the details, so I'm asking you to hypothesize, and then we may have to have a kind of second director's cut, which pulls up, oh well, I've read it now, kind of thing.
Well, it's a great point, Trevor. And the answer is that we don't know. But in principle, what you're
Hmm.
saying is right. So
Okay.
the DMA wants to kind of open the books and oblige the OISs that are designated as gatekeepers
Hmm.
to no longer keep for themselves all of that valuable data
Yep.
about the consumer side, right? The demand side, and
Yep.
make it available to the offer side, to the hotels in this case, when we talk about booking.com. Now,
Gotcha.
how is that going to happen? Very difficult to say. There's an API that has been made available by booking.com. We haven't
Okay.
seen, or at least I haven't read the API documentation yet.
Hmm.
But in a way, in principle, what the DMA is kind of forcing to do is to open the recipe of the secret sauce about,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
this is how we get people into our site, and this is our brand, and this is what we know about all of these users, and because of the way we interpret this data, we are able to sell. And they are great at retailing, all of these companies, don't get me wrong. They do
Absolutely.
a fabulous
Ah,
job
you
because
cannot
they have
knock what they've achieved.
insights,
Yeah.
intelligence of all sorts, and they know how to cater and how to sell to these consumers who are loyal consumers in
Yeah.
many
Very
cases,
much so.
right?
Yep.
So they do a great job of that. But in a way, the DMA is trying to say, tell everyone what your secret sauce is. Now, that in principle is fair or not for me to decide, but
Yep.
how are you going to interpret and activate that? I think it's a big question mark.
And just very quickly, I'm very conscious of your time, and I know we have to have a hard stop in a couple of moments to allow you to go. But from your time, and you may not be able to answer this You can answer it accurately. You may not want to, but if a company like Booking is being told to open up and outline the recipe of their secret sauce, that's a bit like Coca-Cola saying, or these other companies saying, no, our ingredients are our, no one can know, like KFC, no one can know the different spices that they use. If they're forced to do that, does that not create opportunities for the likes of Expedia to kind of look at what do they do, or would Expedia already pretty much? I mean, you work there, so you may not. That's what I mean. You may not be able to quite say what you know or don't know, but am I naive in the sense that, of course, Expedia and Booking, they all know how each other do it. They have their own different ways. So this isn't going to be revelationary for the competitors. It's more just useful for the hoteliers, possibly, or for guys like yourself and Mirai, who could look at that and think, okay, how can we help our hoteliers to gain more direct?
Right. Great question. I mean, you're really
I know.
putting your finger in the crux of it. So the answer is that we don't know, but directionally what we have seen and what the hotel industry and the hotel distribution ecosystem has witnessed through time is that in the past, if we go back 15, 20 years ago, all of these intermediary companies were providing quite a rich profile of the user traveler that was going to the hotel, which meant email address, telephone, name, sometimes even passport details and full credit card details for the payments. Now, depending on merchant or agency model, let's not get into that. The thing is, in the past, you would get significant amounts of knowledge, data, insights on who the consumer, the demand was. Through time, in general, across the board, that amount of data or intelligence about the consumers that were staying in the hotels, and the hotels are the service providers, let's not forget this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the paying for that.
These data or insight or intelligence has been reducing, and there's a number of things, different bells and whistles that have been put by the intermediaries, like getting into payments, changing from agency model to merchant model, and things that kind of have built a big moat, a technological and marketing moat to separate supply and demand, right? So that is what the DMA is trying to address. They want to make it fairer and more accessible because they hope that, the 10-room hotel in southern Italy, the 15-room hotel in Greece, or the 20-room hotel, I'm exaggerating to make a point.
But I know,
In southern Spain, they don't have the budget, the knowledge, and sometimes not even the willingness to develop all of this knowledge. As a result, they are kept type of these bigger platforms that are very good at understanding this data through technology and creating a mode that it's wider and wider and deeper and deeper. So when the hotel wants to reach that consumer, it's almost impossible because they are completely blind about who that consumer is, and they only get a booking reference and not even a payment method, and they just need to cater to the guest upon check-in and say goodbye upon checkout and keep on paying the toll that is required. Right? I'm exaggerating, but
you're
you
making
get the
a point. Yeah,
exactly.
I get that. Okay, very very quickly. One quick question. You spoke about price parity.
Yeah.
And how it had been illegal in certain markets before, and now this DMA bit has kind of tightened that up. I read something the other day which used the terminology algorithmic persuasion strategy, which was that, if I understood this correctly, Booking would promote hotels that cooperate with them and don't necessarily offer cheaper rates, so therefore stay in that price parity piece. Is that a thing, or is that like one of these, it's like a Shaggy Dog story, it exists but doesn't exist? Or
well, there's a lot of speculation about this, and at Mirai, or at least myself, we don't have any evidence of this now.
Okay.
It is true. It is true that Booking.com is a shop. It's a very big shop.
Yep.
And they are able to determine who they put on the shelf and at which height, which would be the sort order of the ranking.
Yeah.
Now, it is true, because this is common knowledge and actually documented on Booking.com sites, that when you are part of the different visibility programs they have, like Genius, Preferred Plus, different payment methods, the hotels get better treatment, better placement if
Got
they
you.
are participating in these
In those
programs
programs. Right.
versus the ones that aren't, because you have a
Okay.
limited amount of space on the screen.
Yeah.
So as a retailer, you need to decide who goes first, who goes second based on criteria. Now, the interesting piece is when they've been designated gatekeeper, one of the most relevant articles is 6.5, which is about self-preferencing.
Yep.
Now, if you're saying you cannot self-preference and kind of throw more traffic or more people to a certain product, a hotel in this case, based on your preference, which could be deeper margins, more money, more commission paid by the hotels,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to determine that?
Yep.
Because the AC is telling Google, do not use your sub-platform hotel ads and use someone
Yeah.
else's, which, could be fair or not, but it is what it is. Now, how is Booking.com going to interpret this and put the number one hotel based on Trevor or Javier's needs?
Yeah.
I am traveling with, 5 kids. You might be traveling with a pet.
Yep.
You want a budget hotel. I might want a luxury hotel.
Yep.
And it should, all of those decisions, the algorithmic decisions should be made in the interest or for the
Of the
benefit
individual.
of the consumer, the traveler,
Got
the
you.
individual,
Yeah.
not
Yep.
necessarily for the retail who's making more
Because
money.
someone's made more money and they should get ranked. Okay.
And again, it's early days and it's
Yeah.
all subject to interpretation. But if you think about Article 6.5, how are the authorities going to dictate a retailer how
Yeah.
to present the product? And we all know that, being on page one, you need to be on page one because page two is
No one looks
irrelevant.
at. Yeah.
And within page one, where do you put, at the top of the shelf, who do you put at the bottom of the shelf, which would be position 1 versus position 10 or whatever it is in
Yeah.
any of the OTAs. Now, there's also retailing is an art. I
Yeah.
mean, when you go to a supermarket, the supermarkets are very good at monetizing traffic and where do they put the
Absolutely.
offers?
Yep.
And, are you at the beginning of the aisle? Are you at the end of the
Yeah.
aisle? So there's an analogy there. And the thing is, there's this piece of regulation of the DMA that it's actually addressing that. So how do you interpret it? And in which interest is this going to be?
Yeah.
Is it on the
It's interesting.
consumer traveler or is it on
Yep.
the retailer, in this case,
Yeah.
the OTAs that have been designated gatekeepers?
Yeah.
And considering that there's kind of a bigger player that runs on top of everything, which is search, which is Google has a leadership position in search in the European Union, and it's being affected the way they put the shops within the shopping mall, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's lots
There's
of
a lot of
moving bits and
it'll be
pieces.
interesting. I think what we need to do is we need to bookmark to catch up with you when you're back from the 25th and have had a chance to read through, because I know also HOTREC came out with, and I'm going to read this exactly from their article I saw yesterday. So other changes introduced by Booking.com are either cosmetic, such as access to data, or not addressed at all. For example, hotels are still forced to use Booking.com's prepayment option with no choice given to consumers. Equally striking and worrying is the fact that Booking.com fails to introduce any meaningful changes to its website interface and does not address concerns regarding ranking. The underlying issues continues to be the lack of transparency on how Booking.com's algorithms work. Okay, so there's obviously something in there. So I think what we need to do is to give you the chance to at least have a chance to read through their document, understand the API, get to the meeting with the EC on the 25th, and then probably come back and revisit you. And then what we can do is, having really set the scene brilliantly today, so thank you so much, is actually then we can have a discussion and say, right, now that we've seen a bit more and looked under the hood, now that you've had one of these workshops that people are discussing, we could kind of revisit you and say, okay, how do we think this is going to play out in the near and medium term?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly not the end of the thing. I would say we are much rather at the start.
We're
And it's
episode 1.
and it's all about interpretation and it's
Indeed.
European law. So it's a complex issue. And I think the European Union doesn't have an easy task at doing this because they're trying to implement a law that they cannot question, and they have to make it fair, because if people start suing the European Commission for this, it could get ugly very quickly.
Exactly.
So our interpretation of the current situation is that the objectives are not being met and consumers have less choice and hotels have to pay a higher toll, at least that's what we see from our data.
Yep.
The HOTREC interpretation is certainly a valid one, and they lead the restaurants and hotels in Europe, and they've been very actively involved in this since the beginning.
Yep.
So I'm sure they have the good reasons to put that statement forward
Yep.
so early. So we'll see. We now need to wait and see how the agenda unfolds.
Fascinating. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, because I've taken a bit more time than you originally anticipated. So, but it's been insightful and sets us up for much future conversations, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor, for considering Mirai for this. We are passionate about this, and we find it fascinating. Maybe we're weird like you, but it's certainly having an impact, and it's costing in our estimates, hundreds of millions of euros to the European hotels. So it's serious business. That's a serious business.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Well, I hope that conversation was of interest, and thanks again to Javier for joining us. If you have any thoughts or views on this conversation, please feel free to comment below. If you like the discussion, please don't forget a thumbs up. And if you're interested in more of our videos, here is a link to our Expert Insights playlist. Here is a link to our Coffee Time Chat playlist. And here is the button if you'd like to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks again for watching.